Hello and welcome to the 69th episode of PEM Podcast, the Psychic Eye Mystery Podcast. I'm your host, Victoria Laurie, with my schmabulous host, co-host, Cindy,
Hi.
who is coming in now that Sandy has retired from PEM Podcast. I know a lot of you are disappointed, but Cindy's awesome. Like, honestly, she is awesome. So those boots, I think, are going to be filled just fine. Cindy, you
Yes,
enjoying the heat? You're down in Florida. You liking
I
that?
I absolutely am not. Yeah,
You
as
poor
as you
thing.
know, like last week our AC broke in my condo and it
Yep.
happened on a Friday and they couldn't come out till Monday, couldn't get the part till Wednesday.
Oh my
Then there
God.
was the 4th of July holiday, so they couldn't fix it till Friday. So after 2 days of trying to stay
I
in
can't
the
even imagine. How
condo.
hot was it outside? Like over
Oh,
100?
yeah, within the heat index, it was over 100. Yeah, but it was like
Oh,
98, but more than 100. And so
oh my
finally on
God.
on Monday, I was like, we're checking into a hotel.
Seriously, right? There's
Yeah.
I had my AC break broke down in Florida too, I think, but like I got really lucky because they came right out and fixed it. Like they don't usually in Florida, there's so many of those guys that it's
Hmm.
like an emergency in the summer when that stuff, but I would imagine that they were full of calls over
Yeah.
the 4th of July weekend. So, or week, like it happened midweek. So it's a tough one to kind of schedule around. So I'm glad that you are okay and that you did not dehydrate or, you know, end up in the hospital because of that. Because I
Yes.
know it's unbearable. Like
Hmm.
I don't know how you slept for those 2 nights.
Oh, yeah, I had an ice pack wrapped in a towel hugging to my chest and one like behind my neck because it really cools you down if you're cool right behind your neck. So I
Yeah.
did that and I could kind of sleep. And I took a CBD gummy, so that helped too.
When in doubt, have a gummy. Awesome sauce. All
Yeah.
right. So let's get this show on the road. This is a deeply personal cold case for me.
Mhm.
Mostly because I was involved tangentially, but still I was involved in this one. Before we get to that, a quick promo of a book I have coming out in November, the end of November, A Trinket for the
Mhm.
Taking. This is the start of a brand new series. Cindy, you have not read this yet. I'm going to send you an advanced reader's copy very soon,
Oh, good.
so you can give me some feedback if you have any. Too late for me to change anything, but the feedback is still glorious. And so this is a book that stars a mystic. And if anybody out there has read the first book in my Spellbound series, A Spell to Unbind, then you're familiar with the world. So W. Van Dalen lives in a world where magic is real, and where people that have been spellbound, that have been have had a spell cast on them, uh, end up having magical powers. So it's a little bit,
Hmm.
kind of like a vampire who bites you, you become a vampire kind of thing,
Mhm.
but without the blood. So and Debbie is basically she works for one of those powerful mystics in the world, Elric Ostergaard, who's a couple millennia years old, and a very valuable trinket. And a trinket is just an object that is imbued with magical powers. A very valuable trinket called uh, Pandora's Promise goes missing. And Pandora's Promise is basically a ring box with a ring inside. And when it opens up, whoever is looking at it will then go and take their life in the manner that scares them the most about how they die. So if
Ooh.
you're afraid of heights, you'll throw yourself off of a building kind of thing. Um,
Oh.
right?
Yeah.
Because it gotta get a little dark. Gotta get a little dark. And the little hedgehog on the cover is named Bits, and
Mhm.
he is also imbued with magical powers, and you get to hang out with him and Debbie and her love interest, who is a mortal, is a regular guy working for the FBI. So it's a nice suspenseful kind of fun mystery. And I love writing that stuff, you know, a little bit of fantasy meets kind of cozy meets murder.
Yeah.
That's my favorite shit to write. So yeah, so that's that.
And that was like my only, not my only question, but my main question was going to be, please tell me a hedgehog is in this as soon as I saw that cover, because that
It
hedgehog is
is,
so
yeah,
cute.
it
So
absolutely
cute.
is. I went down, one of the biggest rabbit holes that I went down in researching this book was hedgehogs, right? Learned all about hedgehogs, but there was a thread of baby hedgehogs that I went down and didn't reappear for like a day because they are beyond adorable. Basically their spikes are like these little pink pointy things. And you know, they like don't even have any fur. They're just pink and absolutely adorable. I really like hedgehogs. I would probably have one if I didn't have, you know, the loud bird in the background and the dog sleeping in her bed over there. I think that they're just like adorable and cute. They make the most incredible noises. So they make like a chuffing sound, like a doo, doo, doo sound. And they also make a squeaking sound when they're excited. That sounds exactly like a dog's squeaky toy. It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. So you all can now go down the hedgehog rabbit hole, if you'd like. And I have these bookmarks made up now when I go and do events where it's a little charm with a little hedgehog. That,
Oh,
right? Can you see?
yep.
Um, so those will be, I have a bookmark making party already lined up. We will be a production force when I go to do the book events when this book comes out. So I do have an event for anybody living in Minneapolis, Minnesota, which is my new fabulous home. I have a event coming up called at Once Upon a Crime. I will be there with the fabulous author Laura Childs. I know she's got a ton of fans, especially in Minnesota. So we'll be doing an event together at Once Upon a Crime on August 10th from noon to 2 p.m. There will be treats, there will be bookmarks, there will be live action. So if you're in the area, please consider stopping by. We would love to see you. Anecdote for the week. I I have a regular client who is you know, he's a guy's guy, right? He used to be one of the best. Sorry, that's the bird. There's nothing I can do. I
Ah.
filled up her food bowl with, you know, nuts and crackers, and she still decided, yes, I'm going to be loud. Anyway, one of my clients is a guy's guy. He used to be a one of the best weightlifters in the world. I think he bench pressed like, I don't know, like 600 pounds, like just ridiculous.
Mhm.
And he's in his 60s now, and I just really enjoy him because he's an all-around good guy. So his mom came through, and his mom started teasing him. And I asked him, I said, "Oh my God, are you like really diving into the vegetables and like more of a vegetarian kind of diet?" And he like got bright red because this is a meat lover, you know, this is a caveman kind of guy. So he got a little beet red. And he's like, "Yeah, you know, I'm trying to eat better. You know, I suffer from injuries from all of that weightlifting for all of those years. So I'm trying to keep the inflammation down." And his mom starts laughing. She starts giggling in my mind, and she's like, "Don't worry, you're not going to turn vegan." So that's what I passed along to him. And he starts giggling and he said, "I literally had a conversation with my son yesterday, who's vegan and keeps pushing it. Listen, son, I'm gonna, you know, I'll maybe do the vegan diet 5 days out of 7, but there are a couple days a week that I'm going to have meat." So it was kind of a mirror of the conversation that he already had. So I thought that was really cute. Yes, they pay attention. They pay attention to make sure that we are eating well, taking care of ourselves, and getting the most out of life, really. So yeah, they pay attention to even the mundane. So
Aw,
start
that's
taking
so
care of
sweet.
yourself. If yeah,
Yeah.
start taking care of yourself if you're not. Mom's watching. So
Yeah,
anyway.
and she's still your mom, and she's going to keep being your mom.
Always. That's the thing is like grandparents remain grandparents and parents remain parents. That vibe, that parental vibe, and that grandparent vibe, because it's different. Parents are like, you should. Grandparents are like, listen to your parents, but this one time you can get away with it, wink, wink. So those personalities still exist. And even I especially love the fact that on the other side, even if you didn't know your grandparents, they still feel that you are their grandchild. And it doesn't matter if you're 11, it doesn't matter if you're 90, they still think of you as their grandbaby, and they still check in on you, see what's going on with you, watch you from, the moment that you're born all the way through the rest of your life. That loving connection always exists, no matter if you knew them or not, no matter if you just had one encounter with them or not. That loving connection, that hierarchical loving connection still remains, which I think is just really kind of special. I know, it's cool. It's really
Yeah.
cool. My job is great. My job is actually awesome. If you would like to get yourself a personal reading from yours truly, please head to victorialaurie.com and click the button that says book a psychic appointment, and you can get on my calendar. So I'll put a link in the YouTube thing below. And if you'd like
Yes.
to pre-order,
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, definitely do that if you haven't already, because it is just going to amaze you. I can say, as someone who's had it done, that every single time it just astounds me. So do it.
it's fun. It's fun, and I think the biggest testament that there's something to it is that I have clients that have been with me for 20 years. I literally have clients that have been with me for 20 years. And what's, I think, most endearing about lately is that I would say about 20% of my clientele now are men, and they're repeat men. They're men that keep coming back. And these aren't, um, kind of woo-woo guys. I don't think that any one of them would ever admit outside of our face-to-face that
Yeah.
they're on my roster. But it's a privilege to read for people and be able to give them some insight into what's kind of coming down the pike, which is fun, and connect them with the other side. So again, if you want your own private session, sign up on my website. So, okay, so Cindy is going to read the cold case, which is the Oakland County serial child killer case. And I spent a lot of time researching this. It's been very, very difficult for me to bring this particular case forward. It is the source of a lot of trauma for me. For anybody that doesn't know, I lived in Oakland County. I lived in a little village in Bloomfield Hills called Bloomfield Village, which was like central to what was going on at the time. So I have a couple of connections to this particular case. So it's been a long time coming, but Cindy, take it away.
Okay. On the morning of February 19th, 1976, the body of 12-year-old Mark Stebbins of Ferndale, Michigan, a suburb of Detroit, was found in the parking lot of a mall just a few miles from his home. His body, discovered within only hours of the time of his death, showed signs of rape and torture, with ligature marks around his neck, wrists, and ankles. Cause of death was asphyxiation. He appeared to have been smothered to death. And although his body showed signs of the violence he'd suffered, he'd been bathed with care and recently fed. 4 days earlier, on a sunny Sunday morning, February 15th, 1976, Mark had disappeared from a walk from the American Legion, where he and his brother had been watching movies. His brother stayed behind to finish the movie, and Mark had phoned his mother from the Legion Hall to let her know that he was on his way home. He never made it. Nearly a year later, on December 26th, 1976, the body of 12-year-old Jill Robinson was discovered along Highway I-75 in Troy, Michigan. Jill had been shot in the face at close range with a shotgun, and although her body did not indicate signs of sexual assault, she too had recently been bathed, clothed, and fed. Jill had gone missing on the night of December 22nd, 1976, from her home in Royal Oak, another suburb of Detroit, after a fight with her mother compelled Jill to run away on her bike to her father's home in Birmingham, which was just a few miles away. She never made it. Within a month, the body of 10-year-old Christine Mihalich was discovered in a snowbank in Franklin, Michigan on January 21st, 1977, roughly 15 minutes from her home in Berkeley, Michigan, a suburb that bordered Royal Oak. Christine had died from asphyxiation, and her autopsy indicated that, like Jill, she had not been sexually assaulted, but she had also been recently bathed and fed. Christine had gone missing in broad daylight 19 days earlier on January 2nd, 1977, when she headed on foot to the local 7-Eleven to buy a teen magazine. Witnesses saw her in the 7-Eleven buying the magazine before she headed the few blocks back home. She never made it. Finally, on March 21st, 1977, the body of 11-year-old Timothy King was discovered in a ditch in Livonia, Michigan, 30 minutes away from his home in Birmingham, Michigan, another suburb of Detroit. Timothy's body showed signs of rape and torture, with ligature marks around his neck, wrists, and ankles, as well as cuts and abrasions all over his body. His body was discovered within a few hours of his death, and like the other three victims, he showed signs of being recently bathed and fed a warm meal of fried chicken and chocolate milk. 5 days earlier, on the evening of March 16th, 1977, Timothy had gone missing from a local pharmacy where he'd gone to purchase a candy bar. Witnesses report seeing Timothy at 8:30 p.m. with a skateboard in the parking lot of the pharmacy, talking to a man with thick sideburns. His sister had loaned him the money for the candy bar and was waiting for him to return home while his parents were out to dinner. He never made it. 5 months after Mark Stebbins' murder, an 8-year-old boy was sexually assaulted so brutally that he needed to be rushed to the emergency room. His witness testimony would lead investigators to an extensive pedophile ring led by millionaire philanthropist Francis Sheldon, who owned an island in Lake Michigan called North Fox Island. Sheldon had purchased the island in 1959 and had told friends and family that he planned to develop it as a vacation resort. But during the summers of 1975 and 1976, the island had been used for the sole purpose of running a pedophile ring where young boys were brought to the island's summer camp for troubled teens. And the boys, ranging in age from 8 to 15, were photographed, given alcohol and drugs, and were raped by wealthy and prominently positioned white men, mostly from the Metro Detroit area. According to victims, some of these men were attorneys, judges, doctors, and wealthy auto executives. Federal authorities shut down the island, but connections from the pedophile ring reverberated out to include the murders of the 4 victims in Oakland County. Francis Sheldon was tipped off to the investigation into Fox Island and fled the country in early fall of 1976, living out the rest of his days in Amsterdam beyond the reach of U.S. federal authorities. From Amsterdam, Sheldon ran an extensive child pornography ring and circulated child pornography throughout the world. He was never held accountable and died with a warehouse full of literally hundreds of thousands of pornographic photos and films of children being sexually assaulted. From that pedophile ring, a list of suspects eventually emerged in the case of the Oakland County Child Serial Killer case, although no one was ever brought to justice for the murders of Mark, Jill, Kathleen, or Tim. The list of suspects includes Archibald Sloan, currently still alive and serving a life sentence in prison for the rape of his neighbor's young son. In his 30s, when the OC murders took place, Sloan was a known pedophile and had been investigated by Ferndale police after Mark Stebbins' murder, but no physical evidence could be found of his connection to Mark's murder, although police did collect tape samples of Sloan's car, and much later, a hair discovered in Sloan's car was a perfect match to 2 other hairs, one found on the body of Tim King and one on the body of Mark Stebbins. The hair found on King had been discovered in his pubic region, indicating intimate contact with this unnamed suspect. Richard Lawson claimed to have intimate knowledge of the serial killers when he was brought in for questioning. Lawson was also a known pedophile with direct links to pedophile rings run in Cass Corridor, a particularly violent and drug-infested neighborhood in Detroit at the time. Lawson was at times partners with Bob Moore, known as Bad-Eyed Bob because of his pronounced lazy eye, who traded in child pornography and had direct links to North Fox Island and Francis Sheldon's child porn industry. Both Lawson and Moore have since died in prison. Gregory Green. He was a violent pedophile who was arrested shortly before the murder of Timothy King and held in custody from the time of his arrest all the way until his death from cancer in a state penitentiary for the rape of a young boy in Flint, Michigan. Due to the violent nature of the rape of that young boy, Green was hauled in for a polygraph regarding the murders of the 4 children from Oakland County. Investigators in Flint declared that Green had passed that polygraph, but experts looking at the results a few decades later indicate Green failed miserably. Green was accused of the violent rape in Flint along with another man, Christopher Bush. The two were known as longtime friends and constantly in trouble with the law. So Christopher Bush. He was the son of H. Lee Bush, GM's controller for Asia and Europe, a high-level executive who lived in Tony Bloomfield Village. Mr. and Mrs. Bush spent most of their time in Europe and Asia, leaving their youngest son, who was 25 at the time of the murders, behind with access to their home in the village. Bush physically fit the description of the man speaking to Timothy King in the parking lot of the pharmacy where he'd been abducted and where Bush's parents also lived. Bush died in October 1977, the victim of an apparent suicide by way of shotgun blast to the head. At the time of his death, Bush's blood alcohol level was 0.41, and photographs from the scene of his room at the time of his death show a slew of suspicious evidence, including sections of rope found in his closet and, most damning, a pencil sketch of a young boy in a hoodie screaming either in pain or fear. The young boy's resemblance to Mark Stebbins, who'd been wearing a red hoodie at the time of his abduction, is uncanny. Noteworthy as well is the fact that 1, Bush's body was tucked in under the covers. 2, his blood alcohol level at the time of his death was 0.41. And 3, there was no gunshot residue on his fingers, no contact burns from the muzzle of the shotgun, and in the report from the crime scene, there was no brain tissue or blood found on the shotgun. And then there's the unknown suspect. Although a hair sample from Arch Sloan's car matched 2 other hairs found on the bodies of Tim King and Mark Stebbins, this mystery man has never been found, although Victoria might have some keen insight into his age and description. Sources for this story include The Snow Killings, a book by Marnie Keenan, Children of the Snow, a 3-part documentary by Jason Applebaum, Wikipedia, Oakland County Child Killer, and Fox 2 Detroit News broadcast from September 26, 2023, Who is the Oakland County Child Killer? 50 years later, murder remains open. So what can you tell us, Victoria, about these horrendous crimes that I hated even reading about, but it
I
was
know,
necessary?
yeah, it was terrible. It was terrible. It's terrible. I mean, imagine being an 11-year-old in the area at the time that these were actually going on. So my family had moved from Indiana to Bloomfield Village, which is where Christopher Bush's family lived. So his parents lived in Bloomfield Village, the same area that I lived in. I'll show you a map in a minute just to show you how close we probably were to each other.
Mhm.
And the class that I transferred into when we moved from Indiana to Bloomfield Village was a class that had Timothy King's best friend. And I remember specifically Timothy King's best friend describing, because it was an open casket, describing what Tim looked like. And at the time, they weren't reporting the violence that occurred to poor Tim. And Tim was a small kid. This wasn't a tall, meaty individual. He was prepubescent. He was a small young man, young boy. And it horrified everybody in the area. Everybody in Oakland County was basically terrified and horrified. And I have a feeling because we moved after the last victim, we moved in after the last victim in October had been taken, that there was this almost kind of disconnection that my parents had to kind of what was going on. So people were afraid, people were scared, but like we were still allowed to go run around the neighborhood on bikes and go where we wanted to go, right? I remember specifically going to a pharmacy that was across a central road called Maple Road to go get candy on my bike and to ride around the neighborhood on my bike. And nobody, really said, hey, lone child of 11, maybe you shouldn't be doing that. So anyway,
Mhm.
Timothy was murdered in February. We moved into the neighborhood in October. The following June, May, June. So in between, Green and Bush are arrested in Flint. They're both living in the area. They're both arrested for the violent rape of this young child. Green, who has no connection to money or connections to connections, is locked away until his trial. Bush, boop, gets popped out by his dad, his very wealthy and connected father. And his wealthy and connected father then, flounces off to Asia and or Europe, leaving his house open and available. That house was in my neighborhood. So, right around June, we got word that we would be moving to London. And I was on my bike, headed down the street. So I'm 2 houses away from my house. I'm headed down the street on the sidewalk, headed to a neighbor who was at the far end of the street. He was an elderly man. I really liked him. I loved his dog. And we would take walks around the block, and Mr. Rinker would talk about the stories about the neighborhood. He was just a fascinating guy. And he didn't walk very fast. Neither did his dog. Dog's name was Bullet. Bullet was like, 11. So Bullet wasn't bulleting anywhere. So I was headed there to see if he was home and if he, was up for the walk. And a brand new shiny Corvette pulls up. Now remember, Christopher Bush's father works for GM. So this beautiful brand new Corvette pulls up on the street, and I was about to cross the street, and I decided, no, okay, I'll just like stay on the sidewalk until this car passes. And it was my brand new 10-speed. So I looked down to see what gear I'm in. And anybody who was raised in the 70s that had a 10-speed, it was about what gear you were in, right? Because you could change the gears. They had those little knobs. And I didn't see the car out of the corner of my eye go by. So I looked up, and this car had pulled over. And it had pulled over in front of the Broadwells. The Broadwells had, I think, 3 kids. One was my age and one was actually in my class. And as I approached the car to go around it, to go across the street, I was actually really fairly close to the car. The engine was still running. And there was a guy, sitting in the front seat. So it was a white Corvette with a red interior. And the guy sitting in the front seat had long, stringy black hair with streaks of gray. He was wearing a striped shirt, and he had gray eyes. And he was looking at me like that, like surprise. And it took me really until I started researching this case to understand why. Why was he looking at me that particular way? I'll get to that in a second. So I see him, and in my head, stranger danger, alarms going off. His car is still running. He's looking at me, very interested. So I take off down the hill. So my street was on a hill, taking off down the hill to get away from him. This is the opposite direction that the car was facing. So I, at the bottom, brake really hard because I'm thinking, get the license plate. And to this day, that's something I really, really feel guilty about, because when I looked behind, this guy had gotten out of the car and was kind of walking in my direction. So I'm out, right? And I take off around the corner. And what troubles me about that moment is that if I could have gotten that license plate, if I just could have gotten that license plate, so much about this case would have been completely different, because I know where it was from. I know that was Christopher Bush's car. Who was sitting in the front seat was not Christopher Bush. So sitting in the front seat was not this guy. That's Christopher Bush. The reason the guy and he didn't fit the description of anybody else that was named as a suspect. So I think this is this other guy. I think the hairs that came to land on Steubens and King, Timothy King and Mark Steubens, came from him because of how he looked at me. He looked at me like he was surprised to see me. And the reason he was surprised to see me was because I looked just like Timothy King. So this photograph of me on the bottom was taken a month later, right before we headed to London. So that's my passport photo, and that's Timothy King. And I think
Oh, wow.
this guy was like, oh my God, it's like the twin of Timothy King. We looked like we could have been twins. And that's where the surprise came in. So I think he went home, went back to Christopher Bush's house and told him about me. After that encounter, I alerted the Bloomfield Village Police Department. So they came, took a report. It was a big thing. The FBI showed up like 2 days later. They took a report. And I have a feeling that, this is my theory, but I have a feeling that when Christopher Bush's parents came home, and mind you, they've already gotten him out of jail in Flint for being a pedophile, right? For raping a small child. And they knew the close proximity of all of these other children that went missing and then were murdered. They also knew the description given of the witness who saw this gentleman, Christopher Bush, standing in the pharmacy talking to Timothy King right before King was abducted. I am convinced, I'm sorry, I am absolutely 100% convinced, this is my opinion, but I am convinced that this is the photo of Christopher Bush's suicide scene. So if you want to go check it out, you can see how he's been tucked in, right? He's been tucked in. If you're about to commit suicide, are you going to tuck yourself in? If you're going to commit suicide, would you have a 0.41 blood alcohol level and still be conscious? You're not. Would you have the dexterity to hold a shotgun without the muzzle hitting your temple or wherever it is that he shot himself, right? Pull the trigger, miraculously not get any gunshot residue on your fingers, and avoid splattering the wall behind you. No. So he obviously was murdered. And I believe he was murdered by someone in his family because of the way he was tucked in. I have a feeling that someone came home, was alerted by the Bloomfield Township Police at the time, which was a tiny little police department, had 2 people. This was a very wealthy suburb in Oakland County. A lot of executives lived there. This man was the controller for GM for Asia and Europe. He was way up there on the totem pole. And I don't think he could afford to have any kind of a connection to what was going on, especially not in his neighborhood, especially not in his neighborhood. So I have a feeling that that chance encounter alerted the family that they had a real fucking problem, and they took care of it. So that's my theory. I could be wrong. But like, this was found in his closet. That was found in Christopher Bush's closet, the rope. And then this is the sketch that was taped to the wall, oddly taped to the wall right next to the bed. Look at the resemblance between that sketch and Mark Stebbins, the first victim. Like, it's uncanny. I have a feeling that was not drawn by Christopher Bush. I have a feeling that was drawn by the guy in the Corvette. He looked a little bit like an artist to me, and it makes total sense. So I just have a feeling like that encounter tipped off the police in the Bush's neighborhood, and they could not have that. They couldn't have this come this close. So they took care of it. That's my theory. I don't know if the Bushes had any connection directly to North Fox Island, which was where Francis Sheldon had the pedophile ring. However, it was known, and it did come out, that there were a lot of wealthy white men that visited that island those 2 summers.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think Christopher Bush was this anomaly that just showed up in this family as a pedophile, as a violent pedophile, a murderous, violent pedophile. I don't think that was just like out of the blue.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was created. So, without pointing fingers, I'm really suspicious of that entire background. Now, obviously, Bush's parents have passed away. I don't know the status of his brothers. His brothers were older. And I certainly don't want to disparage or besmirch the family tree if there's no disparagement or besmirchment to be
Mm-hmm.
made. But I'm really, 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 really fucking suspicious about that whole thing. It's just too many connections for me to buy. The other thing that is really interesting to me is, where did it go? One moment, please. Oh no. How do I get rid of that? I'm sorry. I am when I pulled up this. Yeah, this is the other thing that is really interesting. Okay. So Cindy, can you see my arrow, the cursor? Can you see me
Yes.
flopping it around?
Yep.
Okay. All right.
Yepers.
So this is Bloomfield Village. Okay. Oop, Bloomfield Village. This is Glengarry Road where we lived. We lived right like there, right there. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Glengarry Road passes from Maple, which is a major street. It's 4 lanes. We call it 15-mile Maple Road, right? Passes
Mm-hmm.
through all the way up to, and this is the important part, Corton Road. Corton Road is also known as 16-mile road. So Jill's body was found at basically the intersection of Corton Road and I-75. So if Bush lived in the neighborhood and was bringing kids home to his parents' house while they were in Europe or Asia, torturing them and then murdering them, that would be a real convenient direction to go in to dump the body. The other really interesting thing is, if Bush lived in the neighborhood and was the OC killer, child killer, which I 100% believe he was, all he would have to do was hit Corton Road to this road, which is Woodward Avenue. Woodward Avenue is the main thoroughfare, basically, through Birmingham, where Timothy King was murdered, taken and murdered, to Royal Oak, which was where Jill was abducted, essentially on her way to Birmingham when she went to go to her father's house.
Mm-hmm.
Also along this route are Berkeley and Ferndale. So Woodward bisects all of these neighborhoods. So all Christopher Bush had to do was get onto Corton Road and then turn right onto Woodward, and he could cruise looking for kids. And that's exactly what he did. That's exactly what he did. Right.
Yeah.
So, and it was, it's very easy for him to have access to those thoroughfares. The other direction, which is also interesting, is in the other direction, the other major thoroughfare is Telegraph Avenue. And when they went to go dispose of Melissa's body, right? She was found in a place called Franklin. I'm sorry, Christine Mihalik's. When they went to go dispose of Christine's body, instead of going down Woodward, they just took Telegraph, and Telegraph goes very, very close to Franklin. Like it's a couple streets away. So
Mm-hmm.
all he had to do was go right or left, and he would hit a thoroughfare that was either for looking for kids or dumping them, either way. And the really interesting thing to me is that no one was abducted north of 16 Mile. No kids were abducted north of 16 Mile. They were all south, meaning all
Mhm.
he had to do was turn right onto Woodward Avenue. Easy peasy.
Mhm.
He didn't have to go, because it's a thoroughfare, right? So it's 4 lanes, there's a medium, and then 4 more lanes. So he didn't have to go all the way across to, basically Michigan has like these U-turn, you know, in the middle of an island, you can kind of go into a U-turn lane and then come back north again, which is effort. So all he had to do was turn right and head south. That's all he had to do. And that's, to me, that's exactly what he did.
Mhm.
So that motherfucker was living in my neighborhood.
Oh my God, that's so scary.
Yep.
Ugh.
And I have a feeling that my police report was the determining factor on how long Christopher Bush lived. I think it just got too close for comfort for Senior.
Mhm. I mean, that it's too bad in the way that maybe we won't know for sure, but I'm not sad that he killed himself.
Yeah, no one's sad that he's dead. Trust me, no one. It's like, okay, a shit stain is removed. The thing that sticks with me is if I had just gotten that fucking license plate, I just gotten that license plate. That car
Mhm.
belonged to Bush. I know it did. That was his Corvette. And it would have led right back to his house and wouldn't have saved anybody else's, wouldn't have saved Timothy King's life or any of the other victims. But we would have had an answer and we would have known who the other accomplice was.
Mhm.
And if that fucking asshole hadn't gotten out of the car to kind of walk down the street in shock at seeing me and thinking Timothy King,
Mhm.
it would have been completely different. But it's 50 years ago. You can't rewrite history. And I was 11.
Yeah.
I was a little
Yeah.
outmatched.
Yeah. You can't beat yourself up over an 11-year-old's mistake, or not even mistake. You didn't know. But
Yeah,
I mean, do you think now at any time, like with DNA technology or whatever, that we'll ever find out for sure, that the world will
I
find out for
doubt it.
sure?
I doubt it. This guy was older. He was probably 38 looking because he had streaks of gray in his hair.
Hmm.
And it's one of those things, if it hasn't been discovered yet, I don't think it's going to be. It's a mitochondrial DNA that was the match. So it's not even like a full DNA sample. You can kind of narrow it down to like X number of people, but you can't say definitively it was this guy. And if you didn't have any kids or relatives who are posting, DNA samples up on, what is that? What is that website where they post DNA samples?
Oh, like 23andMe.
Yeah, that one. Then you're never going to find out who it was. I can describe him. I know exactly what he looks like. It's burned into my memory, but who he was is, I think, forever going to be a mystery.
Do
Unless
you feel
someone, knows who Christopher Bush hung out with. And I doubt anybody with knowledge of that is going to step forward, because if you knew who Christopher Bush was
Mhm.
hanging out with, you were probably part of the ring.
Yeah. I mean, do you have any feeling, because he would be probably in his 80s or whatever, do you feel like this guy is still alive, or he's probably passed on by
No, I'm
now?
sure. Well, Archibald Sloan is still alive. Archstone is still alive. And I'm sure he knows, but he hasn't said a word. He hasn't said one word since he was
Hmm.
incarcerated 40 years ago, 40, 50 years ago. So he's not giving it up. And this guy, you're right, would probably be in his 80s. I don't know. I don't know. I think that once Christopher Bush was shot, once he committed suicide, whoever that guy was got the hell out of Dodge.
Yeah.
I don't think he stuck around.
Ugh.
Yeah. So it's a messy case. It's a really messy case, unfortunately. And, the saddest part is that none of these parents, and a few of them have passed away, none of these parents got justice.
Mhm.
And the police have, and the police and the FBI, I mean, there's a case for the police and the FBI that they have kind of stonewalled this because Bush was so highly connected, you know?
Yeah.
So they know who did it. They fucking know
Mm.
who did it. They know. It's never been made public. And they haven't said a word to any of the families about suspects or suspicions or whatever. So I highly, highly recommend um Children of the Snow by Jason Applebaum. That's that
Mhm.
documentary, three-part documentary. It's absolutely fascinating. It's so well researched, and it's just absolutely fascinating because he gives a lot more background to North Fox Island and
Mhm.
how that played a role in all of this. So it's not just like these four victims, this guy went around with an accomplice or two murdering children. It's much, much bigger, and it goes back further. So it's a very disturbing story. There was also a periodical that was passed around by pedophiles, where, you know, they would put in advertisements about where, you know, kids could be swapped, and it was a whole ring. It was like something like Boy Love, I
Mhm.
think was the name of the periodical that would show up in your mailbox, was sent through the mail. Like
Oh my gosh.
yeah, it was horrible, horrible, horrible. You know, we talk
Yeah.
today almost cavalierly now of these, you know, pedophile rings, but in the 70s, they absolutely were a thing. They were
Mhm.
100% a thing. So very, very scary, very creepy. So
Yeah, it is. Ugh.
that's that's the story. That's the scoop. So we've both had like touches with, you know, touches with
Evil.
death.
Yep.
Yeah,
Evil and
yeah,
death.
yeah.
Hmm.
And then I went to work for a guy in my late 20s, murdered his wife.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, so you know. Oh God. Anyway. Cindy,
Is
thank
it?
you, thank you, thank you.
Oh,
Wonderful
you're
seeing you as
welcome.
always. I'm
Yeah.
glad to see you're nice and cool now, not sweating at all, which is awesome.
Yeah.
And we'll be back in 2 weeks or so with another pen podcast for everybody. Keep the suggestions coming. And again, if you want to know more about me or the books that I write or to book a psychic session with me, head to victorialaurie.com. If you are an independent author and you would like your book expertly copy edited, contact Cindy at
At CINDYELAVSKY72
yeah, gmail.com. She's Cindy does all of my independent books. She copy edits all my independent books, and she does a superlative job. So love to plug you, sweetheart. So
Thank
anyway,
you.
all right, guys. Thanks for joining us. Take care. Hope you have a wonderful week, and we'll see you all soon. Okay. All right. Bye.
Bye.